Today's story is about a submarine whose name became a synonym for tragedy and silence. About Kursk, a nuclear giant that was meant to showcase the strength of the fleet. Yet it sank in peacetime, during routine naval exercises. What really happened in August 2000? Why did help come too late? And why, even after so many years, do questions remain that no one has ever answered? Northern silence. The Barents Sea. Gray, heavy, cold. Here, silence is not just background noise. It presses on you. It feels like armor, hiding steel beneath. Summer of the year 2000. Northern Fleet exercises. Routine for the military. Target practice, maneuver drills, readiness tests. Nothing heroic, nothing unexpected. Everything should go according to plan. But at sea, the plan always meets reality. The nuclear submarine Kursk moves into position. The crew is calm. Over 100 men, hardened by service, each knows his place. The commander, Captain First Rank Gennady Lyakin, experienced, confident, trusting his men. At the Northern Fleet headquarters, they are sure the exercises will go flawlessly. And then, it happens. At first, a faint jolt, brief, like a nervous twitch, nothing resembling a catastrophe, more like a hint, a whisper of metal, a moment that could be mistaken for a minor malfunction. Then comes a pause, long, thick, endless. Seconds stretch into years. The crew freezes, all eyes on the instruments. Everyone waits for the next sound. Just over 2 minutes later, it comes. The second blow. A muffled, powerful roar tearing through the hull. An explosion that rips water and steel apart. Bulkheads fold like paper. The lights go out. The submarine shudders and breaks. Inside, chaos. But it's the chaos of confined compartments where everyone knows there's no way out. Someone pulls the Kingston valve to flood and seal off the fire. Someone slams a bulkhead shut, leaving comrades on the other side, and hates himself for it. Someone places a hand on a friend's shoulder and says nothing. There are no words, only breath. Short, hot, ragged. The air grows heavy fast. It smells of scorched metal, oil, smoke, and fear. The temperature drops. Water creeps in. Yet somewhere, hope still clings. In the stern, in the ninth compartment. The surviving crew gathers there, crawling through darkness and sparks. They seal the doors behind them to save what air remains. There's still a pocket of oxygen, enough to hold on, enough to write short messages on wet scraps of paper. Lines meant for only one reader, their families. If you are reading this letter, it means I am gone. Those words will be found later. They will outlive their authors. They will become the voices of men who fought in darkness for the last minutes of life. On the surface, everything still seems calm. Waves lazily slap against the escort ships. The radio hums routine reports. Calm seas, clear visibility. The ocean seems frozen, as if it too is listening to what happened below. At first, the command doesn't grasp the scale of the disaster. Rumors of damage and listing sound unbelievable. Some claim the hull is tilting at impossible angles. Others insist it's minor, everything is under control. But reality is harsher than rumor. The submarine lies on the seabed, nose down, slightly tilted. Not a catastrophic angle, but deadly for those inside. They could have come closer. They could have tried. They could have saved them. But time slipped away. On shore, arguments began. Secrecy, pride, fear of leaks. And every pause cost too much. By the time the hatch to the ninth compartment was opened, it was too late. No one was alive. And the silence of the Barents Sea became the silence of a grave once more. The ninth compartment. The ninth compartment. A simple phrase. But for the crew of Kursk, it became their final hope. After the explosions, Those who survived retreated there. They sealed the doors behind them. The bulkheads echoed. Darkness pressed down. There was little air left, but still, it was there. No light remained in the compartment. Flashlights faded. Batteries drained quickly. Darkness became their only companion. In that darkness, short notes were born. They wrote on damp paper, with a pencil almost by touch. The lines were simple, uneven. The addressees were clear: families, wives, children. Each word was a breath, each phrase a farewell. Lieutenant Captain Dmitry Kolesnikov would leave several sheets behind. On them, the names of those who survived the explosions and made it to the stern. 23 men. A lot for the darkness. Far too few for a nation. People from other compartments are here. We all moved to the Ninth. There are 23 of us. We fought to the end. His handwriting became a voice from under the sea. Time flowed differently inside. It wasn't measured in hours or minutes. It was measured in breaths, in heartbeats, in knocks on steel. They knocked on the hull, sending signals. The metal was deaf, but above, they heard. They recorded it. They passed it to headquarters. No decisions followed. The Ninth Compartment was damp and cold. Water seeped through the seams. The metal breathed. Each breath poisoned by smoke and oil. Every movement a struggle. Some prayed. Some stayed silent. Some sat embracing a comrade and simply waited. All shared the same feeling, the slow pull of hope. And that hope killed more slowly than the water. Families on shore still believed. They looked into the eyes of admirals. They listened to words about difficult conditions, about weather, about listing, about a damaged hatch ring. The words sounded convincing. But those in the Ninth Compartment knew. Time decides everything. They lived for many more hours after the disaster. Long enough to hope, long enough to wait, long enough not to be saved. Water kept rising, oxygen thinned, light was gone, paper remained, a pencil remained, and words remained. Those words outlived their authors and became what we are obliged to remember. Not reports, not press releases, but a note, short, honest, written by the hand of a man who knew. This was his last night. When rescuers finally entered the Ninth Compartment days later, there was water, bodies, and silence. But on the wet paper remained lines that spoke louder than any official statement. If you are reading these words, it means we are gone. That sentence became a verdict on a system where help always comes too late. Time slips away. The first hours after the disaster. On the surface, no one yet understands the true scale of what has happened. At headquarters, they register strange noises and dismiss them as routine sounds from the exercises. By evening, the alarm becomes undeniable. The escort ships await communication from Kursk. There is none. Search operations begin. On the night of August 12th to 13th, the rescue vessel Mikhail Rudnitsky sets out. On board, deep-sea vehicles AS-32 and AS-34 are prepared. Their crews know they are heading for a difficult mission, but they do not yet realize that their greatest battle will be not only with the sea, but with bureaucracy. August 13th. Pyotr Veliky refines the coordinates of the wreck. Sonar detects Kursk's hull at a depth of just over 100 meters. Not an impossible depth. In theory, a rescue is feasible, but theory rarely matches reality. The first attempt at docking. The rescue submersible tries to attach to the escape hatch. The frame doesn't seal. Hydraulics fail. Commanders on the surface await the report. It comes dry and final. Docking failed. On shore, officials start speaking of bad weather. Briefings mention A storm, high waves, strong currents. Families listen and believe. They want to believe. But in truth, the sea that day is tolerable. There's wind, but not deadly. The waves are not lethal. Conditions allow for work. Yet official statements are already diverging from reality. August 14th. New attempts to dock. The submersibles struggle again with the hatch. They report upward. The sealing ring is damaged. The phrase becomes standard in reports. Docking impossible. It is repeated at every press briefing. Families cling to every word. But for those trapped in the ninth compartment, every word means another hour lost. The temperature inside keeps dropping. Air runs thin. The arithmetic of oxygen is merciless. August 15th. A new version surfaces in public. A collision. Deputy Prime Minister Ilya Klebanov hints at a foreign submarine. Admiral Vladimir Kuroyedov alternates between confirming and denying it. Theories clash. But for those below, none of it matters. Families on shore need no theories. They need a rescue timeline. Instead, they get rhetoric. Phrases about weather, about the tilt, about damage. Words that change nothing in the cold water. At headquarters, they delay. Secrecy proves more important than speed. At first, they refuse foreign help. Then they reconsider. Then they reconsider again. And only after days do they finally agree. Meanwhile, in the ninth compartment, men are still alive. They wait. They knock. They write on paper. They believe rescue will come. Their faith lasts longer than the command's readiness to act. Every lost minute becomes another nail in the coffin. Time slips away, and with it, their lives. Refusal and pride. Help arrived quickly, in words. In reality, it came too late. On the bridges of Allied ships, the phrases were simple. Let us dock. We'll try. We know how to work in these conditions. In response, pauses were born on shore. First a short one, then a longer one, then another. Only afterward, a cautious agreement. The reason was framed beautifully. Sovereignty, secrecy, national security. In truth, it was a mixture of habit, fear, and pride. During the 1990s, the sea had often witnessed the fleet's poverty. By the dawn of a new era, the habits remained. Secrets valued more than speed. Faces saved more carefully than minutes. Foreigners were told to stay away from the bow compartments. Only the stern hatch was permitted. The list of prohibitions was thicker than the list of tasks. Every signature took longer than mooring. The British brought the mini-sub LR-5. The Norwegians came with heavy divers and a rescue bell. They knew that accidents demand craftsmanship, brushes, seals, slings, patience, and work by hand where machinery fails. At the briefings, other words were used. Bad weather, severe list, damaged hatch ring, docking impossible. But the divers in wetsuits saw something else. Visibility workable, current tolerable. The hull was tilted, but not fatally. The combing uneven, fixable with a brush and time. Between these two pictures lay politics. Some guarded secrets, others guarded lives. The first did not hurry. The second had no time left. Headquarters chose caution. Caution consumed hours. Hours determined the outcome. In Moscow, the director of a foreign intelligence agency arrived. Officially, a routine visit. For rumor, fuel. For protocol, a line without detail. For the sea, meaningless information. On the flagship, they listened to the depths. On shore, they listened to each other. In the ninth compartment, they listened to silence. Families received formulas in reply. The situation is difficult. The weather window is narrow. Work is underway. But the truth was different. Work was restrained by restrictions. Windows closed under paperwork. When foreign rescuers were finally allowed access, the conditions stayed strict. No approach to the bow, work only at the stern, follow an agreed plan. That plan took longer to approve than to replace a gasket. Commodore David Russell would later say calmly, "They could have docked earlier." Rear Admiral Einar Skorgan would add, with the same quiet certainty, "The sea gave chances. We came and did what should have been done on the first day." Their words do not change the official cause of the explosions, but they expose the managerial cause of the delay. Fear of foreign eyes, fear of leaks, fear of responsibility. Pride sounds noble in ceremonial speeches. In a submarine disaster, it sounds like a pause. And a pause, in such a place, costs breaths. The disabled emergency buoy was called a training measure. It wasn't supposed to surface during maneuvers. It was supposed to surface in distress. It didn't. It stole direction. It stole time. Restricted mode was the term for classified procedures. Restricted mode meant extra signatures. Extra signatures meant extra hours. Extra hours below meant extra death. The Navy always lived by regulations. But regulations do not teach you to fight stubborn metal. Craftsmanship does. Craftsmanship was told to wait. Metal does not like waiting. By evening, pauses turned into briefings. Briefings turned into theories. Theories turned into fog. Fog concealed simple actions. On the decks of Allied ships, men silently dragged hoses and cables. On the decks of ours, men silently awaited permissions. Permissions arrived at bureaucratic speed. The sea does not tolerate that tempo. Even the right decision, made too late, becomes a mistake. Asking for help was right. Asking on the fifth day was too late. Secrecy is necessary, up to the point where it stops killing. Pride is valuable, up to the point where it drowns out the knocking on the hull. In August 2000, those lines were drawn too late. They were drawn on paper. They were drawn after the funerals. This chapter isn't about foreigners being better. It's about the fact that rescue demands speed. Speed demands trust. Trust demands truth. And truth hates pauses. When Norwegian divers finally reached the hatch, they did simple things. Clean, scrape, turn, check, and clean again. The valve yielded not by procedure, but by feel. They turned it the way the metal allowed. Iron gave way to human hands. Inside, they no longer found men, only water. Refusal and pride never sound like a verdict in the moment. They sound like proper words. They look like intelligent decisions. They're signed by respectable titles. And from those words, the lists of the dead are written. We are often told that national security is paramount. That's true. But the security of a nation begins with the lives of its people. If life loses to secrecy, then secrecy is misunderstood. That August in the Barents Sea lacked one thing: the courage to face reality faster than to explain it. The courage to let near the hatch those unafraid of brushes and grit. The courage to value minutes above image. That's how a new kind of silence is born. At first cautious, then convenient, then habitual, then deadly. We must call things by their names. Refusal, masked as pride, cost hours. Hours cost breaths. Breaths cost lives. It's the simple arithmetic of tragedy. If we fail to learn it, the sea will one day ask the same question again. And once again, it will receive the same answer. Pause. Then coordination. Then approval. Then silence. When the doors don't open. The rescue hatch. A round door that, in peacetime, seems a mere formality. During drills, it is barely remembered. But in August 2000, it became a symbol of struggle and despair. August 13th. The first docking attempt. A deep-sea submersible approaches the stern hatch. The frame is supposed to seal tight, but the surface resists stubbornly. The hydraulics falter. The craft won't lock in. On the surface, the report reads, "Attempt failed." August 14th. A new attempt. Commanders again order docking. The craft once more approaches the hatch. Visibility tolerable. Current mild. Yet again, the coupling breaks. A new phrase appears in the reports. "The ring is damaged." That phrase cements itself in the public narrative. The word damaged sounds final. For the families on shore, it becomes a death sentence. For headquarters, it becomes an excuse. But the truth was simpler. The ring wasn't fatally damaged. It was dirty. It was uneven. It needed a brush and patience, not legends about impossibility. August 15th. New approaches by the rescue vehicles. They again try to press against the metal surface. Each time, the frame slips. Each time, the craft pulls away empty. On shore, officials again mention a storm, a list, an impossibility. But the sea was giving chances. Human hands, however, were bound by orders. In the Ninth Compartment, men were still alive. They waited. They believed in the sound of the ceiling frame. They waited for a knock from above, the signal of salvation. But above, there were no knocks, only briefings and theories. August 16th. A decision is made to allow foreign help. The right decision, made too late. Foreign specialists bring their own equipment. They are ready to work by hand. But reaching the site takes a full day, and those below no longer have a day. August 17th and 18th. More attempts, more failures, more reports of impossibility. Each new approach of a submersible sounds like hope. Each retreat like a funeral bell. August 19th. The British arrive. The next day, the Norwegians follow. They listen to the headquarters conditions. Work only near the stern. Do not approach the bow. Do not turn on cameras. Act strictly by command. And they agree. Because time is worth more than arguments. August 20th. The decisive day. The British try a remote vehicle. It yields no result. By evening, the Norwegian divers decide to work by hand. Heavy suits, icy water. Metal that does not like delays. They reach the hatch. The valve of the air conduit is jammed. According to the manual, it should turn one way. The metal gives way in the other. Paper said one thing, iron accepted another, and only human hands understood which was right. The door yielded, but inside, water waited. The Ninth Compartment was already flooded. No one was alive. The next day came the official announcement. There are no crew members in the Ninth Compartment. Families heard those words as a sentence. The hope that had sustained them from the first day shattered. The truth is harsh. Docking was possible. It was not easy. It required time, patience, and courage. It required action sooner. But the doors opened too late. The Norwegian divers would later say it plainly. It could have been done earlier. The sea gave chances. They were not taken. The stern rescue hatch did not become an entrance to salvation. It became an entrance to memory. Each attempt, each failure, each missed connection became a symbol that rescue was possible, but came too late. When the doors don't open, those trapped inside have only one thing left: to write on paper and to wait. To wait until darkness replaces breath. Versions and rumors. A catastrophe is rarely just a fact. It always breeds versions. Versions are born where silence lives. And in this story, there was far too much silence. The official version appeared quickly. A training torpedo, hydrogen peroxide, a weak weld, a leak, a chemical reaction, overheating, a pop, a fire. Then, the detonation of combat torpedoes. The second explosion, the destruction of the bow section. From an engineering standpoint, It seemed logical. The chemistry matched. The metal confirmed it. Seismographs showed 2 explosions. The first weak, the second powerful. The picture fit together. But too many questions remained. Why was an expired torpedo used in a training launch? Why was the documentation full of errors and contradictions? Why had the military economized in the 90s on equipment that killed in the 2000s? Why was the emergency buoy disabled? Why did the rescue come so late? When an official version sounds too dry, alternative ones appear. They're louder, they're scarier. They fit better in the ears of people who've lost trust in authority. The first, the foreign torpedo theory. A round hole was supposedly found in the hull. Photos circulated in the press. The metal seemed bent inward. It could have been an impact. It could have been a shaped charge. It could have been a strike from a foreign submarine. Supporting this theory were rumors about American submarines Memphis and Toledo, which allegedly underwent repairs in Norwegian docks soon after the tragedy. Too convenient a coincidence. Too suspicious. But coincidence is not proof. The second theory, a collision. It explained things simply. 2 subs in the same sector, a navigation error, an impact, crushed steel, headquarters panic, an attempt to conceal foreign presence. This version was fueled by the words of the early days. Admirals themselves hinted at a collision. Later, their words were replaced by torpedo malfunction. But the trace remained in people's memories, and memory outlives any official report. The third theory, Shkval, a supercavitating torpedo, pride of Russian engineers. It flies underwater like a rocket, reaches speeds of over 200 knots. Legend has it that a Shkval ricocheted and struck Kursk's own hull. The story sounded dramatic, but technically almost impossible. The operational parameters didn't match. Yet people wanted to believe in a weapon that turned against its own. The fourth theory, sabotage. A favorite of conspiracy theorists. A planted device. A shaped charge trick. An act of sabotage. A fantasy that explains everything and proves nothing. Each theory lived on photos, rumors, and fragments. Each clung to a scrap of metal or a witness's word. Each burned with the lack of full access to data. Because part of the hull was destroyed. Part of the documents were classified. Part of the data never shown. Engineers argued with engineers. Officers argued with officers. Journalists argued with the state. The truth was hard to separate. One frame showed an inward dent, another, a rescue cut mark. Where was truth? Where substitution? But some things are beyond dispute. 2 explosions, a gap of just over 2 minutes. Seismographs recorded them. The men in the Ninth Compartment felt them. And there are things you can sense without instruments. Darkness, water, cold, notes written almost by touch. And there is something we must say aloud. If help had come earlier, there was a chance. Not certainty, not salvation. A chance. But bureaucracy killed that chance. Silence killed it. Pauses and pride killed it. There will always be versions. Many of them. Because in the void left by power, people search for answers themselves. Sometimes, within those answers, truth. Sometimes only myth. But myths live where truth is spoken too late. The price of secrecy. Secrecy had always been the pride of the Navy. It protected military secrets. It hid the submarine's roots. It concealed both strength and weakness from foreign eyes. But in August 2000, secrecy became the enemy. The emergency buoy, a simple system. If a submarine sinks, the buoy surfaces. By it, rescuers can locate the site of the disaster. By it, they can cut hours from the search. On Kursk, the buoy was disabled beforehand. Officially, so it wouldn't deploy accidentally during exercises. In reality, it stole time. the most precious time. On August 13th, the submarine's coordinates were searched for by sonar. The margin of error was large. Each passing hour disappeared into nothing. If the buoy had surfaced in the first minutes, help would have come sooner. But the buoy stayed silent. Silent, like the officials on shore. Secrecy surrounded everything. The hatch, the coaming, the bow compartments. Foreign rescuers were treated as threats. They were kept at a distance, restricted by orders, denied access to anything that might involve special equipment. But what matters more, the equipment or the men? On shore, they chose the equipment. The men in the Ninth Compartment paid with their breath. Headquarters worked in a mode of filtration. First, reports spoke of storms, then of the list, then of a damaged hatch ring. Every formula sounded convincing, each one a cover. Families believed because they wanted to believe. But behind every phrase stood a pause, and every pause killed. In reality, the weather wasn't deadly. The submarine's list wasn't monstrous. The hatch ring could have been cleaned. But officials clung to convenient legends, because truth meant admitting mistakes, and mistakes meant responsibility. Secrecy became a universal shield. It justified every delay. It excused every refusal. It explained every failure. But at sea, secrecy doesn't save lives. Speed does. Hands do. Skill does. And speed and skill were sacrificed to secrecy. By the time foreigners were finally granted access, too much time had passed. They accepted the conditions. They worked at the stern. They opened the hatch. But inside, they found only water. That too was the price of secrecy. If they had been allowed earlier, there might have been a chance. If the buoy hadn't been disabled, precious time could have been saved. If the truth had been spoken immediately, decisions could have come faster. Instead, the truth drowned in paperwork. Journalists asked questions. They were answered with formulas. Some lost their jobs. Others lost faith. The country lost its men. In the autumn of the following year, the hull was raised, but the bow section was cut off and left on the seabed. Officially, for safety. In fact, for secrecy. Where the explosion happened, where the questions lay, only water remained. Later, the bow was destroyed by an underwater blast, and with it, the possible answers. That is the price of secrecy. It costs more than life, more than time, more than memory. Secrecy was explained as serving the state's interests. But the state is its people. And when people die because of fog and silence, no secret can justify it. The price of secrecy is not measured in sealed files, not in classified reports, not in official archives. It is measured in names. 118 dead, each one part of that price. The dry dock. Autumn of the following year. The northern wind already carries cold, but for sailors and engineers, this season will bring work, not rest. The decision is made. Kursk will be raised. The Dutch company Mamoe receives the contract. Russian officials explain, it cannot be done without foreign help. Too heavy a hull. Too great a risk. The lift, a complex, costly operation. First, the bow section must be cut off. Officially, for safety reasons. The nose was destroyed. Explosive remnants remained inside. Any mistake could cause another blast. Unofficially, that's where the traces were. Where the questions lay, questions no one wanted to answer. The bow is left on the seabed. Later, it will simply be destroyed by an underwater explosion, and with it, the possible evidence will vanish. Where metal could have spoken, there is now only water. The main hull is lifted. Holes are drilled in the bottom. Heavy chains are threaded through. Seals are fastened to keep the sea from bursting in. Cranes tighten the cables. Slowly, painfully slowly, the submarine rises. Every meter is a struggle. Every meter paid for with silence and tension. On the surface wait ships, journalists, families. For some, it is engineering work. For others, the return of memory. October 3rd, 2001. Kursk's hull breaks the surface and is brought into the dry dock. There, it meets concrete and cold. Salt and oil have bitten deep into the steel. Silence gives way to the echo of engineers' footsteps. Inside, they find bodies. They find documents. They find personal things. Photographs, notebooks, pocket watches, cigarettes in packs, papers soaked in water and time. Every find is a blow. Every object reminds them that men lived here. They worked, they laughed, they hoped to come home. Now they are being brought home in another way. Compartment by compartment, the damage is recorded. The first, gone. Simply gone. Only twisted metal, collapsed bulkheads, shredded pipelines. The second, broken and scorched. Fire and pressure turned it into ruin. The third and fourth, fatally crushed by the blast wave. Steel bent so violently that no force could have saved those inside. Farther aft, the picture changes. The stern compartments are better preserved. There, life was still possible. There, waiting was still possible. And that's where 23 men retreated after the explosions. In the Ninth Compartment, they find what will speak louder than any theory. Notes. Short, uneven, written almost by touch. The words of Dmitry Kolesnikov. A list of those who survived the blast. A confession that they fought to the end. Those sheets of paper will outweigh any report. They will enter history. They will outlive every argument. They will make the tragedy human. The dry dock becomes an arena of investigation. Engineers study the metal, record traces of fire, measure residues of overheated peroxide, compare findings with the official version. In general, it matches. But full trust is gone. Every bolt, every dent, every scar raises a question. Why this way? Why weren't the munitions replaced in time? Why was the documentation outdated? Why were the procedures old and the discipline weak? The dry dock gives no answers. It only asks new questions. Questions louder than any press release. Families come to the dock. They look at the hull. They understand this is all that remains. The admiral's words no longer matter. Only the metal does. The paper. The names. The bow is cut off. A part of history destroyed. But what remains of the hull reminds everyone that the truth still leaked through. It's in the notes. In the wreckage. In the eyes of those who witnessed the raising. The dry dock became a place of memory and a place of new secrets. Secrets once again covered by secrecy. Secrets that still remain blank lines in the records. Politics and the media. Every catastrophe has two sides. A human side and a political one. In the story of Kursk, they collided as harshly as steel against the seabed. On the surface, a rescue operation unfolded. Below, men fought for breath. And on shore, an information war began. At first, the authorities said little. Very little. They were in no hurry to admit the scale of the disaster. The phrasing was careful. There are communication problems. Routine procedures are underway. The situation is under control. For the families, those words sounded like lies. They wanted details. They wanted action. Instead, they heard only dry formulas. August 14th and 15th became the turning point. Journalists began to ask questions. Simple ones. Where is the submarine? How much time do the men inside have? What is being done to save them? The answers were vague again. They spoke of weather, of the list, of the damaged hatch. But they didn't speak of the main thing. That help was coming too slowly. The first theories appeared. First, a collision. Then, a torpedo malfunction. Headquarters shifted between explanations. Each one felt like an attempt to distract from the real issue. Delay. Journalists caught every word. Headlines filled newspapers. TV hosts spoke out with open accusation. The loudest voice was that of Sergei Dorenko. He said what many were afraid to, that the country was not saving its own, that the government was hiding the truth. Soon after, his show was shut down. Permanently. His career was broken. The name Dorenko joined the list of those who paid for honesty. Meanwhile, the nation waited for the president's words. Vladimir Putin remained in Sochi. Officially, a working vacation. In reality, a pause the country could not understand. That pause became a symbol of indifference. Later, when an American journalist asked him about the tragedy, his reply was brief. She sank. Two simple words. They were meant to sound ironic. They sounded like a diagnosis. The country took them as a sign of detachment, a cold gesture from a man unwilling to say more. Those words became a meme, an aphorism, a formula of alienation between power and people. They were repeated for years, remembered every time tragedy was explained with dry phrases. August 23rd was declared a day of mourning. Flags lowered. Television showed grieving faces. But for the families, it brought no comfort. They wished the mourning had begun earlier, while there was still hope. On August 26th, Captain Gennady Lyashin was posthumously awarded the title Hero of Russia. The rest of the crew received the Order of Courage. These were rightful honors, but they could not replace life. Awards never replace breath. The political system survived. It drew conclusions, not about rescue, but about information. Since then, tragedies have been covered differently. Fewer details, fewer outsiders, fewer open eyes. Official explanations began to appear faster, but shorter and quieter. Kursk became a boundary line, the border between an old habit, to talk too much, and a new one, to say too little. Since then, news reports have favored only dry numbers, lists of the dead, no details, no humanity. The media lost. The government won the information war. But with that victory, the country lost something far greater. Trust. And trust cannot be restored with medals. Politics and media ended up on opposite shores, and between them stretched the water, cold and deep, like the place where Kursk lies. The voice of Kolesnikov. His name was Dmitry Kolesnikov. Lieutenant captain, an officer, a husband, a son, a friend. That August, he became the voice of the entire crew. When the submarine sank to the seabed, darkness consumed the compartments. Water crept in, bulkheads groaned, the air thinned with every breath. And then he did what only a man who understands the value of time can do. He took a sheet of paper and a pencil and began to write. The lines were short, uneven, damp. His hand trembled, but his handwriting stayed firm. He wasn't writing for himself. He was writing for those who needed to know the truth. All have gone to the Ninth Compartment. There are 23 of us. We fought. He listed the names, so that no one would remain nameless, so that families would know their loved ones held on to the very end, so that memory would bear not a number, but a name. Those words would later be read aloud. The whole country would hear them. They would sound more terrible than any official report, because these were not the words of a commission. They were the words of a man who was dying, yet still carried the calm of an officer. There was no panic in that note. No curses, no hatred. There was composure, and above all, a plea. If you are reading these lines, it means we are gone. It was both a statement and a testament, not an accusation, but a request to be remembered. That piece of paper survived the water, survived the darkness, survived Kursk itself, and surfaced together with the bodies. Dmitry Kolesnikov's note became a symbol of courage, a symbol of tragedy, a symbol that even in darkness, a man can remain human. It became stronger than any medal, stronger than any speech, stronger than any official version, because truth always breaks through metal, through water, through lies. Truth speaks in the voice of a man writing his last words to the living. That note shattered the legend that all had died instantly. It proved that men had lived for many more hours. They waited, they hoped, they believed, and they were never saved. Everyone who saw that page understood. Rescue had been possible. Fragile, uncertain, but possible. If help had come in time, if the doors had opened earlier, if the pauses hadn't stretched into days. The voice of Kolesnikov is not just a personal tragedy. It is an indictment of a system, a mirror those in power refuse to face, a voice louder than any justification. Today, his words are kept like a relic. They are quoted, they are studied, they are shown at memorials. But for the families, they remain deeply personal. The final lines written by the hand of someone they loved. The Kolesnikov note is not just a document. It is a reminder that behind every number stands a person, that every delay kills not in theory, but in flesh and name, with a face, with a story. The voice of Kolesnikov still speaks, and it always will, because paper preserves what metal and water tried to hide, because words are stronger than silence. Lessons and myths. Every catastrophe brings lessons, but not all are learned. The tragedy of Kursk became an exam the country passed only halfway. Officially, it was said, conclusions have been drawn. The submarine fleet received new protocols. Emergency systems were improved. Exercises were now backed by reserve crews. International agreements on rescue cooperation were signed. On paper, it looked convincing. But real lessons are tested by time, and time showed much remained the same. Secrecy, isolation, an unwillingness to admit mistakes. After Kursk, people began to speak more often about an aging fleet, about worn-out machinery, about modernization that lagged behind, about crews forced to work at the limits of endurance. But talk rarely turned into action. Kursk became not only a symbol of tragedy, but of fear of change. Because to admit error means to strike the system, and the system does not like blows. It prefers myths. The first myth of instant death, that it all ended in seconds, that no one suffered, that no one waited. Kolesnikov's note destroyed that myth. It proved they fought, and that the myth was merely a convenient screen for authority. The second myth of impossible rescue. That help could never have come in time, that the sea was stronger than man, that fate was sealed. But the rescuers' calculations told a different story. If access had been granted sooner, there was a chance. Not for all, but for some. The third myth of a complete investigation. That every point was clarified, that causes were known, that guilt was assigned. In truth, many documents remained classified. Many details were destroyed along with the bow section, which means the truth was never whole. Over the years, myths began to live on their own. They turned into legends. Some spoke of a collision with an American sub. some of a Shkval torpedo explosion, some of a conspiracy, a deliberate sacrifice for secrecy. These stories divided society. They fed distrust, and distrust grew. Instead of transparency, rumors. Instead of confession, silence. Instead of truth, half-truth, more frightening than lies. But there were real lessons too, for the people, for the families of the dead, for those who still serve. They learned that one can only rely on one another, that orders from above may come too late, that outside help may never arrive, that what truly matters is brotherhood, and the will to hold on to the end. For Russia, Kursk became a point of pain, pain strong enough to mark a generation. Young officers grew up knowing that the system can betray, and that only personal courage makes the difference. Today, the name Kursk echoes at memorials, in books, in films, in the hearts of those who serve in the North. And each time it is spoken, it sounds like a warning. Myths will live long, because myth is more comfortable than truth. But truth always finds a way out. Truth lives in names, in the paper with crooked lines, in the memory of those who waited in the dark. And that is the main lesson, that even in the depths, even in total darkness, man leaves light behind. That light is memory. That light is words. That light is stronger than any excuse. The tragedy of Kursk became the symbol of an era where men fought to the end, and a system revealed its indifference. 118 men went into the cold depths, but their voices did not vanish. They speak through papers, through names, through the memory of the living. Those voices tell us the essential truth, that truth always rises to the surface, that time cannot be reclaimed, that silence kills as surely as water. We've grown used to official versions. We've grown used to living with myths. But behind every phrase, "it sank," stand real faces, real families, real fates. We are obliged to remember, obliged to speak, obliged to draw conclusions, because only memory saves the future. Only memory prevents tragedy from repeating. Only memory keeps people alive, in our words. If this story speaks to you, if you want to keep hearing what others tried to silence, support our channel. Subscribe. Like the video. Ring the bell. Let the memory of Kursk live on. Not in myths, not in excuses, but in the truth we must never lose.